Okay, let's go over what the process of reviewing a project looks like. First, we have to determine if it triggers CEQA. In defining what a project is, we have 3 questions that guide us. Does it involve exercising discretionary power by a public agency? Does it result in a direct or reasonably foreseeable indirect physical change in the environment? And is the action considered a project? In the project question, it includes an action directly by a government agency, like student housing established by a public university, and action supported by a public agency, like Caltrans funding a highway project, or any action that needs a discretionary permit from a public agency. Think like CUPs or any permits that require a hearing. As you can see, the definition of a project is very broad. So broad that the state legislature has used its power to define what the specific actions are not considered projects under CEQA. These include, but are not limited to, the following. While broad, this is very important. So important, in fact, that I'm going to give you an example. No, I grew up in West LA, and I didn't get a chance to visit Inglewood that much. Can't say I wished I had, but in 2015, they broke ground on this thing, SoFi Stadium. It's the center of a 295-acre project, mixed use, lots of entertainment, lots of residential and commercial. Because of how large this is and how heavily socioeconomically and environmentally impactful it might be, it might have been, it might have triggered CEQA. It didn't. It actually didn't. And the reason why is very interesting. This stadium and its 295 acres of mixed-use development were all ministerial. And that's because it was a ballot initiative. And when a ballot initiative happens, the only thing that a city council has to do is either put it up to a vote by the citizens of Inglewood or approve it as written. And the council approved it as written, making it ministerial. So technically, SoFi Stadium was a ministerial project. Huh, funny, huh? Okay, well, I'm done talking about this place. Let's go down further south, just across the street to an actual CEQA project. All right, welcome back. You joined me here, still in Inglewood, just a few blocks away from SoFi, right here in the corner, looking at Intuit Dome, the soon-to-be home of the Los Angeles Clippers. They were once a good basketball team. Intuit Dome is similar to SoFi, that it is an entertainment venue at the center. It is a mixed-use project. The only difference is Intuit Dome is 10 times smaller, only 26 acres, and well, I had to go through CEQA. It has an all EIR, as everything that an EIR comes with, and yet, why? Well, it's simple. Just go back to discretionary versus ministerial. SoFi Stadium, again, as we said, was a ministerial project, technically. Intuit Dome was a discretionary project. One of the many ways that you could go past DIR is having a ministerial project. However, Intuit didn't choose the way of trying to put a ballot measure on, because I don't think it worked twice. So there we go, we have it. So you might also be wondering, is it possible to divide a project into smaller projects so that it doesn't trigger CEQA? Well, no. In fact, we have a term for it. It's called piecemealing, which obviously isn't allowed. CEQA requires the whole intention of a project, and the indirect environmental effects are also considered. However, it should be noted that they must be reasonably foreseeable. As a wide variety of things are considered CEQA projects, there are some things we don't want to go through the environmental review for many reasons, so we have an exemption process. These exemptions fall under 3 categories of reasons: political, efficiency, and common sense. The first type is a statutory exemption. These are exemptions written into the state statute by legislators. Things such as air quality permits, ministerial projects, emergency projects, Olympic Games. Wait, hold on. Olympic Games? So because statutory exemptions are written into law by legislators, some exemptions are purely political. Olympic Games and the construction of buildings that facilitate them are one example of this. Another type of exemption is the categorical exemption. These are for the types of projects that have shown time and time again to have minimal environmental effects. Moreover, these types of projects are sometimes carried out so often that rather than going through and taking time to write a whole initial study and negative declaration, which we'll get to soon, it is classified as an exemption for efficiency. While there are less types of categorical exemptions, a common categorical exemption is the Class 32 exemption, also known as infill. These apply to projects that are within city boundaries, which site has already been significantly altered from the natural landscape. Think of converting an old warehouse near downtown into a rave club. However, it should be noted that there are some exceptions related to potential effects that they still require noticing and public comments. The last type of exemption is the general exemption, also known as the common sense exception. These are projects where it can be seen with certainty that there is no possibility that the activity is not subject to CEQA. Of course, this is difficult to prove and requires a very, very strong case. If the project is determined to be an exemption, the lead agency has the option to file a notice called a Notice of Exemption, or NOE for short. Creative, I know. An NOE is required for specific statutory exemptions. However, in practice, an NOE is almost mandatory for most exempted projects as it will allow a 35-day period instead of a 180-day period of challenge. This thereby encourages the lead agency to justify its actions, something that is in line with the spirit of CEQA as a public disclosure law. The NOE contains the following. It has to be posted and made available for public viewing, which includes the internet. Appendix Z of the guidelines has a recommended NOE form. If the project in question does not meet any exemption, then we will move on to the next step, the initial study, or IS for short. This step is to determine whether the environmental effects of the project are potentially significant enough to require an environmental review. This environmental review is known as the Environmental Impact Report, or EIR. If the lead agency believes the project requires an EIR right off the bat, then the IS can be skipped. The possible outcomes of an IS are the following: a negative declaration, a mitigated negative declaration, or an EIR. There is no specific process of conducting an initial study. It can be done by the lead agency or another party. However, if it is done by another party, the lead agency must review it beforehand. The initial study itself uses information from a plethora of sources, including information from the applicant. Moreover, the IS does not require public circulation, meaning that the public is not required to review the IS. However, the lead agency may choose to informally circulate the draft, which is very beneficial. Circulation may further assist in streamlining the process as comments can give insight into development of mitigation measures to support an MND or identify potential effects ahead of time. If the IS concludes a negative declaration, either through an ND or MND, then a notice of determination is circulated. If it concludes the need for an EIR, a notice of preparation or NOP is determined. An IS contains the following things. While there is no specific format for most lead agencies, a good format can be found in the guidelines. This document is widely known as Appendix G and acts like an IS checklist of some sorts. If any answer on the appendix is answered as potentially significant impact, then it tells the reader that an EIR must be prepared. While it is a somewhat comprehensive format, it may not address all issues pertaining to the specific jurisdiction. Assuming that your IS is undisputed, you now must see whether the project meets the requirements of a negative declaration. An ND is when there is no substantial evidence of any possible significant impact on the environment. If there are, then you would need to mitigate it. But have no fear, an EIR is not required yet. If the IS finds significant impact but the applicant agrees to mitigate it and the mitigation is found to reduce the impact to lower than the determined significance, then you can determine that it is a mitigated negative declaration, or MND. Easy, right? Surely there's no way you can mess this one up. So the IS conclusion can fall under scrutiny if it's not done thoroughly. This is from the Fair Argument Clause. An EIR must be prepared, according to the Public Resources Code, when it can be fairly argued based on substantial evidence in light of the whole record before the agency that a project may have a significant effect on the environment. This means that if there is substantial evidence presented to the agency of a potential significant impact, the lead agency must prepare an EIR. Okay, so what counts as substantial evidence? Well, I'm glad you asked. Substantial evidence can be expert opinion supported by facts. It can also be sufficient relevant information and reasonable inferences from information given to make a fair argument. It does not include the following: argument, speculation, claims not backed up by facts, erroneous or inaccurate evidence, social or economic impacts that do not contribute to or not caused by physical impacts on the environment. Effect on the environment is based on the existing environmental setting of the project. This is known as the baseline. The agency must justify why they use a particular baseline as well. Even if the lead agency is presented with evidence of the project not having a potential significant impact, an EIR must be prepared as long as it can make a fair argument. Okay, so what's with this term and clause fair argument? It's quite vague, right? Well, a fair argument clause in this case is a low bar for litigation. It is purposely set to a low threshold in the name of informing decision makers to the best of their ability. While this is the spirit of the application of fair argument, it is highly controversial. It is no surprise that it favors opponents of projects as they can bump a MND or ND up to an EIR. It can also be used to discredit mitigations proposed to reduce impacts to below threshold of significance. We'll get to that term soon. Moreover, it forces the lead agency to take received comments seriously because of the fair argument clause. However, it allows the agency to discuss comments and make mitigations that address the received comments to avoid an EIR. During litigation, the fair argument clause encompasses all information on the administrative record. This includes comments from the public as well as findings from agencies and even the lead agency staff. Apologies for the rabbit hole of the tangent. Also, wait, what counts as significant impact? So the threshold of significance is based on the judgment of an agency. It must be backed up by scientific and factual data. Is there a specific definition? No. Why? Because significance varies by setting. For example, the threshold of significance for traffic is usually a lot higher in an urban downtown than somewhere along a rural county area. Per guideline section 15358, a significant effect on the environment is generally defined as a substantial or potentially substantial adverse change in the physical environment. Let's dissect that sentence a bit. Environment encompasses physical conditions that exist within the area affected by the project and can include man-made and natural conditions. Things like land, air, water, minerals, noise, and even historical and aesthetic resources. The affected area is determined by the area of which the significant impact affects either directly or indirectly. These areas differ from impact to impact. While the findings for impacts are not strictly listed, there are a list of mandatory findings. Any of these findings, if found to be significant impacts, will trigger an EIR. Guidelines state that the project will significantly impact the environment if... Of course, these are vague modifiers. Therefore, these are somewhat open to interpretation. Additionally, it isn't the end of the world yet, as the lead agency can still apply mitigations in order to reduce impact, hopefully to below the threshold. How are the thresholds set? They're done by the lead agency. They must be identifiable, quantitative, qualitative, or performance level of specific effect. These thresholds must be adopted through public review, usually an ordinance, resolution, rules, or regulation. If the lead agency is reviewing a project and doesn't have any thresholds set on hand, then the specific project can adopt thresholds without needing the formal means I just mentioned. However, most thresholds are based on existing regulatory agency standards such as air standards from CARB, water thresholds from basin plans, etc. Actually, Appendix G has a list for each question in regards to where to search for a threshold. Okay, that's been nice, long and all, but why should we care or even implement an initial study anyways? So the main point of an initial study is twofold. It is used as an interagency consultation method. What I mean by this is it ensures that all affected agencies have a voice in the decision-making process. Agencies are considered experts in their subject matter, and what this means is that should an agency request an EIR to be prepared, the lead agency knows ahead of time. Moreover, it allows the same agency to collaborate with the lead agency in including possible mitigation measures to avoid impact. Even if an agency outright determines that the project requires an EIR, preparing an initial study helps the project down the road. An IS can be used to focus the EIR on potential significant effects by identifying them ahead of time. This allows the lead agency to avoid unnecessary analysis of non-potentially significant effects. It also is used to support findings that a project will not have significant unmitigated environmental impact. And finally, sometimes it can reveal to the lead agency that the project itself can be mitigated to the degree that it can be classified as an MND. Okay, I know this was a long one, but do you even know what's even longer? Yep, that's right, EIRs themselves. I'll see you next time.